Good morning, everyone. How's everybody today? Welcome to our webinar, Improving IT Efficiency with macOS Monterey. I am Pam Lefkowitz, and I'm an IT columnist and assorted other things here at JumpCloud. Today's panelists include Bradley Chambers, who is the marketing guy at Cripple and also does a bit of writing at 9to5Mac. And Tom Bridge, our principal product manager. How many times a day do you have to say that at JumpCloud?
Not too often, but fair enough. I was going to say, it's great to see you, Pam. It's great to see you, Bradley.
It's good to see both of you.
Excited to talk about all of these awesome things with macOS Monterey today.
It's going to be
Yeah, I think
great.
it's good that we timed this the days after the announcement, so we don't have to speculate on it. And
Right.
it's a fun announcement, and I'm not in buy anything, and I think that's good for my wallet, not good for Apple's. But I love to see Apple doing cool things with Mac hardware. We've seen them do awesome things with Mac software in recent years, and the Mac Studio, it's one of those, even on the monitor, like there are things that are not for me, but I am super glad they exist because I think the things they do on the high end eventually kind of trickle their way down to devices that like regular people use day to day.
Yes.
And I've never been more happy and bullish on the Mac as a whole as I am in 2022.
Yeah, I love how the first thing folks do after an announcement is go and configure the most expensive. What is it going to be if I do absolutely everything, right? So you get some people who are like, oh, well, it's $79.99. Goes, no, but if you add blah, no, it's $10,000 for an Ultra Mini.
Yeah, I was going to say the wallet, my credit card left immediately out of my wallet, and I ended up purchasing a Apple Studio display, if only because I was waiting for it. So I was thrilled to pick one of those up. I got it with the Visa mount kit on the back.
Nice.
I'm really excited to see what the future holds for the Mac Studio, if only because the M1 Ultra that's in there is such a phenomenal piece of technology. It is two M1 Max chips with a special interchange layer between them that is 4 times faster than the single best interchange layer between processors that's available right now. So I'm thrilled to see what this brings. Again, not for me, but that doesn't mean I won't covet one, much like I covet the current Mac Pro. So, with Apple announcing that they're essentially through their Apple Silicon transition with the exception of the Mac Pro, we've got a lot of things to be really excited about as Mac admins today.
We do. It'll be interesting to see how this translates to who's going to use this computer, who it's not built for, what's going to be they always do something giant and then they bring it down to a more consumer level or a more day-to-day office level. So it'll be interesting to see what that transition becomes.
Yeah, still quite happy. I'm still using the original M1 MacBook Air, and it's still just my favorite. Now, computer I'm most satisfied with today, I still will go on record to say my favorite computer of all time is the 12-inch PowerBook G4.
Yeah, I bought that one on the way out of the keynote. Yeah, I did that a couple of times. It's really hard to not buy when you were sitting in Macworld and in the in the orb, right? It's like impossible to not buy when you're in there. So let's go a quick review of what we talked about last month. These are the features that Monterey had, or that came about with Monterey. Without going into a deep dive on ECAS or universal control, do you have any updates on the slick things you've discovered in any of these items? Was there like something you did and you went, oh man, I didn't realize it did that?
Well, the software update improvements that we got as part of macOS Monterey have been a little bit slower to arrive than I'd hoped. And with now the beta cycle for macOS 12.3 releasing very soon, next week, as a matter of fact, I was really hoping that the deferrals control and the install later, as well as install ASAP, were going to be in much better shape than they are. I will say that as an MDM manufacturer, we have certainly taken a look at those. I've been watching other MDMs kind of adapt to this place, and the feature just doesn't feel like it's all the way there yet. So from my perspective, I think that is just fine. But I think it's going to be a place where Apple needs to grow faster. And we did get some really great enterprise-facing features here associated with macOS Monterey, including EACS, erase all contents and settings, and some things that are there. But the MDM specification as a whole still has so much room to grow and improve and make life better for Mac admins than we currently have.
Yeah, Bradley?
Yeah, I think iCloud Private Relay is one I still kind of keep an eye on. Think it's something you should probably all turn off on your core computers still. There's just a lot of there's a lot of weirdness there around that. So yeah, I think so. Leave that off. Overall, still happy with this release. I think every kind of point release, this feels like it's been about 2 steps forward with no steps back. Been good. Really, from an end user perspective, I think focus modes is probably low key, probably my favorite feature here. How you can kind of construct focus modes. So again, if you're a developer and you kind of set up your system, so you develop, it's cool because you can say trigger it from your phone. It syncs over to your Mac. I think that's something that probably could be in employee training and onboarding in years to come for that. Just again, structuring your day, because again, we've all got badges on our dock that things are coming at us. It's in some ways way too easy to get someone's attention. So it's really up to us to kind of build the system that allows us to do deep focus work and put the rest of it kind of to bed. So yeah, overall,
What a great idea.
Been a good year.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great idea about the onboarding. Very nice. So Monterey is going to bring us I don't know about a huge amount of stuff, but significant items.
Absolutely. The .3 release of any Apple operating system is the spring release. That's the one that they hold. It's called the E release. If you look at the build IDs of any macOS, there's a major number. So in our case for Monterey, it's 21. And then there's that second character, which starts today and then goes up through the alphabet. This is the E release. The E release is kind of that feature release for the springtime. And so it's anything that didn't make it out of the A cycle end up put into the E cycle and above. And so the last piece of that build number is the build ID as a whole, right? So we do have some major changes as part of macOS Monterey 12.3 that will be out next week. And that one of the most important here is it's a removal of system Python. The Python 2.7 framework that is in there, and we have had it with that Monday to Friday snakes on the to use the PG version of snakes on a plane. But Python 2 is now gone from macOS. And so if you try to run a system Python command, you're not going to find one. If you were referencing Python 3 before, you're going to need to make sure you've either got the Xcode developer tools installed, or you're going to need an update to your path to include whichever relocatable Python framework you've installed, whether that is the Python framework directly from the python.org website, which is available as a PKG file so that you can install it using whatever method you happen to have to bring that to bear. Or you're using a product like the MacAdmin's relocatable Python framework, which powers tools like Monkey and other tools like that. You're going to need to bring your own Python as part of this process. So this affects some very strange things, including things like Microsoft Defender. The installer for Microsoft Defender for macOS relies on system Python. By the time this is out next week, if you have an old package, you're going to want to chuck it out and get the latest version, because it will include the latest version of Python 3 to run its post-install scripts. Because the post-install script that is part of Defender today is using system Python. So look for a new version that's out there. You're going to need to download that and use that to install in the future.
So Tom, what's going to happen when Apple does an update after it removes Python, we install Python 3, Apple does an update, is it going to overwrite this?
No, because that's the thing. This is your Python 3. It ends up not in the user SBin environment or in the private frameworks libraries. This is something that's going to be assigned to your system. It'll probably live in user local bin and then be added to your path from there. So, or in the event of the relocatable Python, whichever environment, goes from there. So, I think that is a part of what's happening here. You're going to need to own your own destiny when it comes to scripting languages like this.
Wow.
I think this is a kind of a good reminder of you don't have to push it out to your employees on day one. If you've got some dependencies here that maybe you're just discovering this today, maybe hold that release for a week, 2 weeks. Obviously, we really, I iterate to people like getting on the newest version of macOS is the most secure. So you want to be aiming to do that, but no one says like, hey, day one, this is out, entire fleet has to be on it. And so if you're just discovering this today, go start researching what you have that's built around this that's going to be gone. Get some devices on the beta, see what breaks. And if you're ready, then deploy it or allow employees to deploy it. If not, you've got 90 days to block it. And so you've got, if it's coming out next week, you've got 97 days or so to 96 days or so to block it, and you can get ready. But yeah, it's something that start getting ready for today if you're not.
So, absolutely.
Do we have anybody who has set up a site yet on what will and won't work once Python's gone? Like they did when they had the what's not going to work with your X operating system?
I don't think so. I was going to say, I don't think that's something that, the use of the regular system Python is going to pop up in weird places. And chances are, as an admin, you've already run into what those places are. Beginning with macOS 12, if you had a Python script that was running as part of your environment, you were getting a pop-up on the screen that said Python has got, this version of Python, or this version of the code that's being run is being deprecated in the future. Please contact your IT administrator. So there has been warning for this. That is what's there. And a question from the audience is, to be clear, is 12.3 removing Python? Yes, it is. If you're reliant on user SBin Python, which is where the existing 12.2 and prior binaries have lived, if you're calling that with the script, it is going away. Commands will error if they are intending to call that out. Any tool that is reliant on system Python is going to have a problem. Now, this is something that Apple told us 2 years ago. In a future release, the version of Python that's installed with the system would be going away. They have called that out loud and clear at WWDC in 2020. So, here we are in March of 2022, and they have made good on their commitment and essentially have pulled that software back out of the system. You're still free to install your own version of Python 3. Python.org does supply packages for you to do so. Just be ready that your tooling may have to change.
Kind of scary for some. This is a hair on fire.
Right? I don't think it's necessarily hair on fire. But especially because a lot of vendors have been told, hey, look, 18 months ago, you got told by Apple that this was going away. You either need to include your own Python framework in your product, perfectly acceptable for you to do, or you need to have another version of Python available. Now, it even catches people like Microsoft by surprise, apparently. And so they found out early in the beta cycle that there was, in fact, a Python script as part of the post install for Defender. And so to fix that, they should make it just in time for the release of the 12.3 next week. But any organization that's using legacy packages, so packages that were not released or that were not new as of next week, you're going to need to chuck those out and replace them with newer packages.
All right, cool. Hey, Bradley, I want to back up just a second, just something you said in your in our beginning little conversation. You had mentioned something about turning off iCloud Private Relay, and we've got somebody who was asking why. So I don't want to go too far off the base, but
it's this middle ground between like not quite a VPN, not quite not, depending on if your Okta uses location to determine. There's just a lot of weirdness. Like it was in beta up until now. There is a way to disable it if you're an IT admin. I just don't think there's any benefit to for IT professionals when deploying it, like with their end user using it. In fact, it just may cause some weirdness and like applications to act a little weird. I would just argue there's probably not a good reason for you to run it today.
Okay.
But that's my opinion. So yeah.
All right. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Where are we headed next, Ben? Ooh, obliteration mode.
Obliteration.
Of course, whenever I think of obliteration, I think of Marvin the Martian and his, plutonium ray, from the old Bugs Bunny cartoons. Because yes, indeed, I am that old to have watched them when I was a kid. This is something that is brand new as part of macOS Monterey, and it's kind of paired up nicely with erase all contents and settings. So erase all contents and settings is something that can reach a set of conditions where it can occur. Either there's multiple partitions on the box, either there are, there's no bootstrap token on the device if it's file vault encrypted. But what you have happen at that point is when the system receives an erasure command that basically says, I'm done here, please reset yourself for the next person. What happens is the system will either say, I did that, that's cool, or it's going to say, oh, I did not do that. Some condition was met at this point where I could not go through the EACS or EECS environment. And instead, what I had to do was obliterate the disk. This is essentially the behavior that was present in macOS prior to Monterey, which isn't a great experience. When you fire an erasure command towards a Mac running prior to macOS 12, what does it do, right? It doesn't just erase the user data and start over setup assistant. It wipes out the entire disk, including the operating system. So you get the blanking question mark folder. That's obliteration. What that is doing is stripping out the volume encryption keys from the system, and it rips them right out and basically says, there is no way to unlock this disk. And since file vault encryption includes the operating system, there's nobody home left. The operating system is blown away, it is gone. You have to go into recovery mode. You have to download an installer from the interwebs or use the version that's in the recovery partition and then reinstall the operating system. That process can take 45 minutes to an hour. That's a long process. So essentially, if you're not going to be able to use EECS, you're going to rely back on this obliteration mode. And so that's one of the things that if you see out there, if you see the words obliteration behavior, which is what Apple calls the action here, we can either say, hey, as part of this process, I either want you to acknowledge the command or I want you to full on error. Default behavior is full on error. If you're just acknowledging that experience and then wiping the disk, you'll get an acknowledgement or you'll get an error. Both of those result in a machine that has been wiped. There's also an obliteration behavior that your MDM can deliver, which is essentially in the event that EACS is not eligible, then you need to essentially stop. And that is something that your MDM can do as part of its erasure process. Is if you really want this machine to always go through EACS, instead of wiping machine in the field and just going to blinking question mark, you're going to need to talk to your MDM manufacturer and make sure that that's a feature that they've included. And so where it essentially will stop. That's a fail safe. It's not, or I'm sorry, that's a fail open, not a fail closed kind of mechanism. And so fail open means the disk is now untouched and could be unlocked by an attacker. So essentially, if you have secure data out in the field, you probably don't want to use this. This is probably meant for labs where you'd want to diagnose what exactly happened to the machine. But that's a certain part of what obliteration behavior is. So that's really all it is.
It'll be interesting. Like, we don't have any like blog posts or like real world examples of like someone that tried to do EAC on 1,000 Macs remotely, like what happened. I kind of feel like that would be fun thing for somebody to do, is like to go into like a high school gym, have 100 Macs sitting there and try to do EAC on all of them and like see how many of them work. Because I would be shocked if that was not 100 machines. Yeah. That's how good EACS is. The only time you're likely to run into a failure to execute EACS is when you have been, shall we say, doing things that are deep and abidingly concerning, not to mention not warranted or very concerning.
So, if you're going out there and you're adding multiple APFS partitions, if you're doing a bunch of other things related to the user directory, if you're not MDM enrolling these machines and getting a bootstrap token, those are the kind of situations that are going to take you to that problem. But my expectation is 100% success on a group of 100 machines. If we were doing this on 1,000 machines, maybe we'd get one or two. But at least in terms of how you're set up with those erasure commands, as long as they are on the network, I think that's where you're going to run into bigger problems. 100 machines on the same AP in the same gym could stress out the AP to the point where the machine doesn't necessarily acknowledge the command.
I think 95 needs to have a an
Test lab.
EAC challenge.
Sounds
I
like
love
sounds like a JumpCloud thing to me. Tom, you haven't actually got it in there.
But we're all remote, man. We don't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. That'll be good. It'll be good. It's still a good feature, but again, I still sometimes think I wish Apple would sell me a macOS thumb drive. Yes, I know you can make them yourself. I think it was Lion, the last one they sold. It was like a branded Lion thumb drive. That was nice to have, just as a backup.
That'd be cool. So, what is happening with these two folks, and golly, why?
Yeah, this is
Were they like surprised that this was going to happen?
Yes and no.
It's a problem and it's not. Like, so I mean, I think we have to kind of take a step back to remember, like, when Dropbox first came to the Mac, I mean, gosh, 10 years ago? I don't even remember. Like, it's been a while. Dropbox has been around a while. It was a hack the way it worked. Like, it was always a hack. Like, Dropbox sort of like shoehorned its little syncing thing in there with the folder sync. And then like Google sort of did it and it sort of kind of worked and other companies did it. And then Apple just said, well, look, if we're going to have this thing, like a file syncing folder thing, then we probably need to build an API. And they did. And it's like, obviously, like every API sort of evolved over the years. Companies have sort of followed it, maybe not. And so really 12.3 makes it where some things break and it affects a lot of people. Now, the cool thing is, it looks like for your major vendors, your Dropboxes and your OneDrives are not just going to stop working completely. Like, so it's not going to be a situation where like this no longer just works at all. Like the folder does not sync anymore. Where you run into the issues is if you have situations where files are, because you know Dropbox and OneDrive can do these things where the files are like showing in Finder, but they're not taking up hard drive space, which is really useful if you've got like a team, like if you're, I don't know, at JumpCloud, let's say you have like a Tom's team where they're sharing a 1 terabyte license or something, and you got but nobody has a machine that big. So you say, oh, this folder just be online only. And that's different from the selective sync. Selective sync is where I don't even want to see this folder. Online only was like, show me the files in Finder, but I don't download them. And then you could do things like open them and it would download it really quickly. And there you go. Some of those like workarounds were like in Dropbox, if you try to go to Word and open a file that was online and it used to just download it in the background, like some of that stuff breaks. The nice thing is Dropbox and Microsoft are both kind of working on their fixes here. Microsoft has said like they are actually re-architecting how this works in OneDrive. And so again, it's something to know about. Like if your heavily integrated workflows are into applications of where folders sync with things, that's where you need to be concerned. Now, if you're an organization that uses Google Workspace and 99% of your access of your Google files are through like the web browser, hey, you're fine. But I think that's something just to be aware. There are some major changes to this API. They're going to break these type of apps in 12.3.
All right.
I think there's a second piece here. One of the things that we talk about in terms of good IT policy is the same kind of thing that we talked a little bit before with those Python scripts. If you've got a place where there's a key piece of software, you have some time to delay and wait for a patch. Microsoft has said that the next version of the OneDrive client will work with the new file APIs. That release is 22.033, which I believe is slated for this coming Tuesday, same day as the release date for macOS 12.3. So it looks like they're going to make it. Dropbox has a release that's in beta. Now, some organizations feel very strongly that deploying beta software is like cutting off your own hands, and it's a really bad idea, and you shouldn't do it. And I certainly respect that, and I certainly would not want to roll that out fleet-wide, but I may want to test with it. So that you can check to see what's going on, provide feedback during the beta period. And that's also kind of what the Apple Seed for IT program with Apple is good for. Apple started releasing betas for macOS 12.3 in January, which means you may have had 6 to 8 weeks to figure out where the problems are inside your organization in terms of things that don't work, things that are not operating properly. And you can provide feedback to Apple during that beta cycle. I strongly encourage every IT professional to join this free program. And in fact, if you already have a managed Apple ID for use with Apple Business Manager or the Volume Purchase Program store, either of those are going to work just fine for signing up for Appleseed. You can visit them at appleseed.apple.com and join that program, and you'll get access to pre-release software so that you can take a look and figure out what's best for your organization in terms of adapting to new software products. So I strongly recommend that every IT department have somebody who's got a beta working on their work device because it's really important. I live and die by the betas for good or for ill. But it's more important for my organization to have that kind of advanced knowledge of how the systems work than it is for me to not need to grab a spare machine once in a while, although I haven't had to for the last couple of years. So I feel pretty strongly that at this point, there are solutions to these problems. You just may want to have a little bit of a delay to test those. And that's what the MDM controls for delaying minor software releases is there for.
Excellent. Thanks, Tom. That's very valuable. Let's talk about universal control. We talked about it a little bit last time when it was released. What's new and different, Tom?
So I love this feature because it means that essentially you slap down your iPad next to your machine as long as they're signed into the exact same Apple ID, and then for now that's a commercial Apple ID and not a managed Apple ID. You can essentially use the cursor and keyboard on your Mac to control the interface on the iOS device or iPadOS device that's next to you, which means you can continue to do amazing things with the touch interface or the pencil interface for iPadOS, and then use copy and paste to go back and forth between the machines directly. It's just like having an extra set of hands. It's incredible to see how this works. What I think is most fun about it is that you just move your cursor across the screen, and it's like breaking through a barrier, right? It's like you're going through a little bit more resistance to get over to the iPad screen, which I think is a fascinating experience. So I'm really excited to see what this allows for. This will also let you do this for 2 Macs that are next to each other and signed into the exact same Apple ID. So that if you have an iMac and a laptop set up next to each other, the same kind of thing applies. They're just an extension of each other that way. And it automatically switches over between the two in terms of how they connect with Bluetooth, how they connect with Wi-Fi. This does require that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth be on because it uses the same kind of stuff that your watch uses to figure out if you're nearby your computer to do an authentication. It's Wi-Fi time of flight as well as Bluetooth connectivity to make those kind of things happen. This is a really magical experience when you get to try it. If you have creatives that work with iPads all day or work with Macs and iPads together, this is a great way to bring those 2 platforms together and to essentially use them as a common tool so that you can easily take things that come directly out of macOS and put them in iOS and vice versa.
So KVM developers are going to go by the way.
Well, I mean, you really can never use a KVM with an iOS device anyhow. This is the only way to do those kind of remote control actions on an iPad. Mac to Mac, obviously, yeah, I was just going to say, I spend most of my time ending up doing screen sharing between, one of my VM farms and me, or my personal machine and my work machine, just to have a view into that environment. So, but yes, this is exciting.
This is exciting.
Well, obviously there's some opportunities for Apple to evolve this for the business use case as well. I mean, we've all probably been, probably in recent years, we've been sitting at a table, you've got 4 laptops sitting there on you, you're trying to get, do something on each of them, troubleshooting things, or like you could almost see a situation where if you're on the same managed Apple ID, or if you're an admin on your managed Apple ID, where you could almost like force universal control over machines around you that maybe weren't even yours. You can see the same thing with like a kiosk system for iPads. So if you're, an IT professional and you're going into a museum or somewhere they've got a bunch of iPads sitting around. So again, it's kind of the same thing. There's opportunities there. Now that the technology's kind of there, there's ways to evolve this for businesses as well, but particularly, retail and those kind of, in places where there's a lot of iPads.
Can you universal control more than one device at a time, Tom?
Correct, you can. You can do this with up to, I think it's 3 total. So you can have your primary Mac and then a Mac next to it and then an iOS device next to that. So I think you get a total of 3 screens that you can go back and forth between.
That's going to be a blast.
I'm excited for it.
Pushing files from one to another that way, going to be so nice. No more file sharing. Hey, I'm excited.
No, it's pretty exciting because it's just AirDrop behind the scenes, right? It's Wi-Fi time of flight. It's Bluetooth. It's a technology stack that we are well aware of, and we can go from there.
We'll leave it to Apple to improve on something that's already there and make it, sort of just ubiquitous. It's there. We don't know it. It's cool. I think this is what folks really want to know about. They want to know how we're going to make things better, faster, with less work.
Yeah, no, that's a big part of life, right? One of the neat things that macOS brought us in Monterey was the arrival of shortcuts on the desktop. And one of the things that I was most excited to see in Apple's documentation for shortcuts is a whole lot of information on how you use things like post APIs and get APIs to interact with shortcuts and do tasks, which means that as an admin, you can interact directly with the JumpCloud API with shortcuts on your device. And so our RESTful API, the docs for which are all public, you can go check those out at docs.jumpcloud.com. You can get an API token for your instance. You can slap that into some queries that are being done by a shortcut to return you out a list of users, for example, who maybe are on devices that are older than macOS 12.3. So that essentially you can use those kind of things in concert to make shortcuts to essentially talk to your individual end users and basically say, hey, I noticed you hadn't done your update yet. Can you tell me why you're late? Or, hey, I noticed that your machine's starting to get pretty full on its disk space. Can we set up some time to chat and clear you some space to have a better experience with your computer? Or better yet, for those organizations who have real clear return to service workflows in terms of like, hey, your machine is updated every 3 years like clockwork, or every 2 years like clockwork, or every 5 years like clockwork. You can go through that process and figure out how to go in through that and start to use the tools that that platforms like JumpCloud can provide through APIs to really make your admin life just so much better.
Slick.
Well, Tom, I just would like to say that if I'm ever low on disk storage space, I would like for you to tell me, because that was the most kind way you could say that. No, I think you're really seeing shortcuts grow up here. It's one of those where Apple is starting to piece out the Legos here of the future of automation, and you're starting to, if you see all the Legos on the table, like they may not make sense, but then another Lego gets on the table, and you start to get the vision here for what's to come.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So there's this article in this publication called 9 to 5 Mac. I think we know a guy. T2 Mac security vulnerability means passwords can now be cracked. Go, Brad.
Obviously, when things like this come out, they're a concern for IT professionals. I think this article came out, a month ago. I'm not going to say it's a nothing thing, but I don't think it's something that you should lose sleep over. I think your IT, this is not something that, the way the vulnerability is reported, there's been some additional things after that's kind of downplaying the feasibility of cracking this through T2. I think the thing I would say is, look, if someone gets a hold of your machine physically, because this is a physical attack, you have other problems at this point. And if you're an IT professional, your concerns should be way more about, do I have MFA turned on, multi-factor authentication? Do I have passwords or enforced passwords across all applications that are strong and unique? Do I have a way for users to effectively manage those passwords using an app, 1Password, LastPass, one of those? And I think that's the things that should be the focus, not necessarily on, there has been some report that the T2 can be cracked under these certain situations. So it's a good, again, it's a there's nothing is ever perfect, but I think I would still rely on it heavily.
100%. Really what we're talking about is the ability for an attacker to try 15 passwords a second. Now, if your password is 20 characters and maybe generated by a tool like 1Password, where you're using multiple words, you're using all sorts of other kind of pieces to decorate a policy, password, numbers, special characters, all sorts of things that we talk about all the time as IT professionals is what's a good password, right? And from my perspective, is starting with, about a year ago, I would say a good password is 16 to 20 characters or longer, upper, lower, special character, number, and be done with it. Those passwords are still fairly safe from attacks like this, where you're essentially talking about the amount of time that you would have to spend to attack that password would be decades, hundreds of years, even under these circumstances. So I'm very excited to, I'm not worried about this necessarily. Now, if your user has a 6-character password, you have bigger problems. So I think that there are great tools that you can use to make sure that your systems have good password policies associated with them.
And if you've got them all into an MDM, your laptop gets lost, you've got obliteration right there, right? So you have the extra protection.
I think I'm really still very bullish on the enterprise, the way that 1Password has really grown up here around the enterprise. I've been using 1Password since probably 08, 09, whenever, I think when the company was first started, and they've really expanded out their APIs to work with a lot of enterprise systems as well. It's no longer just like, oh, this is your personal password tool. There's a lot of really good enterprise features to 1Password now, and LastPass as well. The user experience is still that, I would argue, the Apple-like experience. Both of them do a good job. I'm a 1Password customer myself. I know a lot of organizations that have rolled that out. I just think if you take anything away from this in terms of password security, is if you don't have something like 1Password implemented across your organization, this is a good time to do so, to make sure that users have really strong passwords everywhere that can sync securely everywhere.
Awesome. All right, so everybody breathe. Don't worry, it's not as bad as we thought it was. We can live with that. So Bradley, you've been a really good friend here. We really appreciate it. We want to give you a little bit of time to talk about Cripple and JumpCloud.
Yeah. So a lot of people ask me, like, who is Cripple? What does Cripple do? Well, if you're a JumpCloud customer, Cripple is a great thing to get, and there's a great free version that you could get today. So essentially, I will explain Cripple as you've got all your sources over here. You've got whatever servers you have. You've got your JumpCloud logs. Anything that you have that produces logging data, metrics, and traces, you generally are going to send that to places like Splunk. Okay. Well, maybe your JumpCloud data, your logging data, maybe you don't like the format that it's in. So maybe you want to enrich it on the way into Splunk. Well, you can route that through our primary product, Cripple log stream today. You can reformat it. You can reduce it. So let's say, for example, the logs coming out of your JumpCloud instance are bigger than you need. It contains more than you need. Well, you can actually really reduce those on the way into Splunk. So if you need to go back later and analyze your JumpCloud logs, you don't have as much to search through in Splunk. You're not paying Splunk as much to store it. But let's say, for example, your JumpCloud logs aren't that important to you today. Maybe you're saying, hey, I don't need to analyze those today, but I need to keep them for compliance reasons. Cripple allows you to say, send those to a low-cost storage like an Amazon S3. But if you needed them later, you can route them back to Splunk using Cripple's replay functionality. So again, it's all about giving you full control and choice over the format and destinations of all of your logging data. So, you know, again, we've got customers that are producing terabytes and terabytes and terabytes a day of logs, and we let you really do whatever you want to do with them, enriching, reducing them, even masking them on the way in. So if you have a system, you run an e-commerce company, and your POS system generates your logging data, you can make sure that all customer data is masked before you ever ingest it into your analytics system. The last thing you want to do is have customer data exposed in your analytics system. It's free up to 1 terabyte a day. You can learn more about it at cripple.io. There's a free sandbox at sandbox.cripple.io. So if you like thinking, hey, I want to try this, but I don't have the authority to hook up these systems to try it, we have a fully functional version in the cloud with canned data. And again, our free cloud version lets you process up to 1 terabyte a day. So again, that's at cripple.io.
Nice. Nice. Thanks. Tom, have you used this? Do you know, have you seen this in action yet? Oh, but he will. We
I've
know
seen
Tom.
some videos, I've seen some demos, but I have not dove in the deep end yet. I was going to say my attention has been elsewhere lately, around JumpCloud's efforts on OS patch policy, as well as on the future of iOS development. So lots of good stuff coming from the JumpCloud side, but I have not dove in the deep end on this one yet. Although, I mean, I certainly know the reputation of these organizations, and I'm excited to learn more.
Cool.
Yeah, I kind of explain. Somebody asked me like, I don't live in the logging industry. Like, what is the equivalent of like how you explain that? And I said, look, imagine for the last 20 years you'd used email with no spam filtering. And like, I don't mean like, oh, you have no spam folder, but like the stuff that your mail server blocks, that because there's no cost to send an email. So your mail server drops 10 million messages a day, doesn't even hit you. Imagine if you'd been using email like that for 20 years, and all of a sudden then you got spam filtering, and then you got a spam folder. That's what Cripple does for your logging infrastructure, because now, up until now, it's just been like, hey, all of your sources, you shove everything in your analytics system and hope and pray. It's kind of like the closet where you shove everything in there. You can't find anything. You can't shut the door hardly. That's what most organizations' analytics systems are at now. And so we allow you to say like, hey, you want to route that somewhere else, you can do that. You want to shrink that, you can do that. You want to pull that part of it, you can do that. So we really kind of give people that manage Splunk environments, particularly, and all of these analytics tools, will give you full control over how and where and when you store things.
Very cool. Thanks, Bradley. Appreciate that. So let's do some Q&A. Got a resource page for you. We have a slide for Q&A, but I'm just going to leave the resources up for you folks. First question, under what conditions does erase all content and settings not appear in the system menu?
The only conditions where erase all contents and settings does not appear in the system preferences menu is when you are blocking it specifically. By default, it will show up there. And if you want to take measures to have a policy to block that, you are certainly welcome to set up an MDM configuration for that.
Fabulous.
Feels like instead of there's an app for that, it's now there's a policy for that.
That's exactly right. I mean,
Feels like
Apple
a JumpCloud shirt.
Sounds like a JumpCloud shirt. Nice.
I'll put that with my File or Radar shirt, which is also, there's policy for that.
Oh, that's
except for the things that aren't.
So do we know, going back to the Dropbox OneDrive thing, do we know if Google Drive will be affected the same way as other cloud file services?
My understanding, it is not. The frameworks that are being in use, or the frameworks that are used by the Dropbox and OneDrive apps are the much older cloud framework, cloud file service framework APIs. And so my understanding is that those are the only ones that are affected, and OneDrive and Dropbox are the two biggest players in that space who are affected. Google Drive file stream uses another technology entirely that's based on kernel extensions and system extensions, whereas the Dropbox and OneDrive file extensions are built into the operating system and don't require kernel access.
I mean, I think it's just one thing to note. I mean, this is like, if you don't have to have these files locally, like it's okay to access them in the web browser. And I mean, I think it's just like when you're in IT, and obviously like every user has their workflows, but like, for example, like I always had the model of like when I deployed Google Workspace, like if you want to, if you don't care, use the web browser to access your email because it's just going to be easier. Like there's fewer things to break. If you want a desktop app, well, okay, let's set that up. All right. Kind of the same thing here with your files. If you're like an organization that lives out of Google Workspace, OneDrive, all this, and you kind of access the stuff in a browser most of the time, maybe you just don't have the app locally. Like it's okay to do that. Like it doesn't take up hard drive space. You can access it all in the web browser. Like all these things work really well in the browser today. And it just is like fewer things to break in the future. If that makes
It's a
sense.
really hard mental transition though, to go from working always in the desktop to always in the cloud. I know when I
Mm-hmm.
did the transition from working in M365 to working at another service, it was like it was tough. It's sort of natural now, but it was tough for me. I was very used to desktop apps and mistrusting, but it's a culture shock. It's culture shock. All right, we have a really good question now, and something we ask periodically all the time. The one feature we really like on Windows is a rollback feature. So do you either of you see any hope for an erase all contents and settings that goes back to a previously saved snapshot instead of going back to a clean install? For example, install a bunch of software on a loaner computer, and when they're returned or having trouble, they can be blasted back to a known good state without having to go through the
But
whole deployment again.
my expectation there is no, and I'll talk about why. Because I feel like I feel like that's the condition that Apple wants to set is that you don't know where a given machine is going to go. And in most organizations, there's a differential between what gets installed based on who's going to use the machine next. And so a developer doesn't need the same thing as a creative, who doesn't need the same thing as a lawyer, who doesn't need the same thing as, a member of the clerical staff. So in terms of the configuration there, I certainly understand why that's important. It's just not something that you can really plan for as the platform vendor here. And that really the best experience that you want to have is the experience where the user goes through that out of box experience again, where they validate that they are who they say they are, that they receive a configuration based on who they prove they are, and then get the applications that are necessary for your organization based on who they are. I can certainly say, hey, would it be nice to go back to a different snapshot than the one that was essentially taken as the base model, which is just the operating system snapshot? Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. I don't know how they do it though, because essentially the way that the sealed system volume works and the way that the user partition works, you would not be blowing away the user partition at all. You would be essentially putting something else into a third partition. So
Mhm.
I maybe we'll get this when macOS 14 or 15 comes, but at least for the moment, it's going to be a bit.
Bradley's shaking his head now.
There are 1,000 things I would like Apple to do, and the times when this might be useful, I think, are limited. And you sort of like if you're again, so there's the things you can do like personally, and there's things you can do like kind of in the enterprise. And like if there was a
Mhm.
way, I mean, again, you're talking about like you could do a clone of your system, and there's all kinds of weird things. I guess the only reason I would think this would ever be useful is if you upgraded to, macOS 13 and you realized something key was broken and you had to go back to 12. Like that would maybe be the reason that you would just want a quick, rollback.
Mhm.
Um, but it's just there's just like so many variables here that would just break so many things that, and again, I can't think of like outside of a few edge cases like where you could make business justification here for an infrastructure for that. What I would rather have Apple do is to figure out some sort of like restore from the cloud thing where like a managed Apple ID like basically clones everything about your system or even your personal Apple ID where like you don't have to like it's basically like you do with iOS, like you just sign in and everything starts appearing. And I want that for the Mac. Like you can sort of do that where it's like,
Right.
there's sort of some things, but like I'm talking like I want everything the same. Like I want my wallpaper the same. I want the things in the menu bar. Like I want that. And whether that's like
So time machine?
yeah, but like in the cloud, like I don't want like it's 2022. I don't want like a hard drive sitting there. I mean, come on.
You want everybody to have your data. I get it.
There it has it.
Very securely. Very securely. That's important.
So Tom, this one is for you.
Mhm.
How soon will we be seeing the ability to manage iOS updates from JumpCloud?
Sure. So let's talk about that for a second, because I think that it's very interesting. You know, when we think about the problem state that we're in for solving macOS versions, for example, in order to manage the operating system version on a macOS system, it needs to be supervised. How do you get supervision on a macOS? Well, you enroll it in an MDM. That's all you have to do to manage a macOS systems version of the operating system, right? Like you can send the software update commands to any Mac that's enrolled in your MDM. That's not true with iOS. In fact, the only systems that you can manage with iOS are systems that have been through automated device enrollment, or systems that are devices that have been through automated device enrollment, and devices that have been supervised with Apple Configurator 2. Those are the only systems over which you can say you must update your version of iOS right now. The rest of it is held into the end user's control. So while there are other ways to manage the expectations and the behavior of an end user on a device that's enrolled in your MDM without supervision, there are no requirements. So we are looking at this topic. We are hoping for a better experience in this space from Apple in the future. We have no reason to believe that they are working on it, however, so they don't comment on future products. So we're going to be taking a wait and see experience, because if we look at the kinds of devices that are enrolled with JumpCloud's iOS management today, those are mostly unsupervised devices, 99% or more, if only because our automated device enrollment feature isn't available yet, hopefully end of next week. But if we look at the supervision iOS update story, the device also has to be in use, which means if it's like my phone right now, unlocked or is locked, I can send the command, but it won't process until the device is woken up, and I give it my facial identifier, and then I tap in the code to issue the automated updated restart. So the landscape for handling patch management on iOS devices is substantially more complicated than it is for macOS. So we're taking a wait and see approach here. We're obviously going to be able to provide those kind of update paths for supervised systems or supervised devices, but that represents a much smaller part of the landscape than it does on macOS. I hope that answers the question at least moderately appropriately. If it doesn't, drop me an email. I'm tom.bridge@jumpcloud.com.
Thanks, Tom. Regarding managed Apple IDs, what are your thoughts on this topic? Are there any serious concerns or drawbacks to working towards a managed Apple ID environment?
I would say there are concerns. I won't say that, and there are drawbacks, but I don't say there are problems. What we're talking about here are trade-offs. Using managed Apple IDs means essentially taking away the control of the Apple ID from the end user and placing it in the hands of the admin. Usually that sounds like a perfectly fine thing to do. However, there are some challenges associated with that. The challenge in specific that I'm talking about here are now the user cannot install their own updates or their own applications that must come from an MDM. They must come from their corporation. How do you manage the credentials on those? You have to do it manually, which means you have to create them one by one, which means you have to do password resets one by one, and you cannot federate with anybody who is not Azure AD. If you're a shop that's using Google Workspace for your directory, if you're a shop that's using JumpCloud for your directory, Okta or OneLogin, they cannot federate Apple IDs today. Apple, if this is important to your organization, there's feedback you need to be delivering through the Apple Seed for IT program, and there's a guide on how to do that at tombridge.com. And I strongly recommend that you go take a look at that. I'd be happy to talk with anybody about that who wants to really use those kind of things. There's also limits on what the managed Apple IDs can do. Managed Apple IDs cannot add storage without using Apple Business Essentials. Managed Apple IDs are limited from using certain kinds of features, including handoff. So all of that universal control that we just talked about, not available for managed Apple IDs. So there are a lot of limits in association with managed Apple IDs, and I don't necessarily recommend their use at this time. They're very helpful for things like user enrollment, when you want to supply a couple of apps to a user's personal iOS device. User enrollment's a great way to do that. And so there are places for it. However, it is mostly a solution in search of a problem right
Awesome. You actually sort of answered the next question, which is how can companies with strict security or data loss prevention policies prevent users transferring data between company and personal devices using universal control? And obviously, one answer is managed Apple
now.
IDs.
The answer is you sign into, use your work device with your work Apple ID and go to town from there. Now, there are other things that you can do. So if you do rely on the user's personal Apple ID for these kind of things, there are things that you can block with a mobile device manager, for example. You can turn off handoff. You can turn off Bluetooth for their device. These are things that you can do to block access to those tools. And you don't need a DLP tool to do that. You can just do that with the MDM and essentially say, I'm sorry, handoff is not allowed here.
Great.
And then there's obviously controls you can put into place, when there's MDM involved with pasteboard, certain apps, open-in, and certain apps. There's a lot of things to do. But kind of piggyback on what you're talking about, managed Apple IDs, I think the way I would frame it is only go that route at scale if you have a reason to. It shouldn't be your default.
Yes. I love
Agreed.
that method of practice.
I strongly agree. And, the other thing to recognize is that, anything that you can drag and drop between, handoff is something that if they've got a personal mobile phone, scan text with their iPhone will do it just fine. So the answer here is not in necessarily providing deeply intrusive and very, very privacy intruding tools like DLP. The answer is hiring people you trust, trusting them, and making them feel valued in your organization. That is more expensive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys, we got one last question. Can you still restore data from Time Machine when EACS is performed?
Absolutely. You're going through Setup Assistant when EACS is performed. So when EACS is performed, the machine goes back to the hello screen at the end of the process. And it chucked out the old user's data, kept the sealed system volume, and has just triggered the creation of a new user data partition, which means you go through Setup Assistant the same way you do if the machine was brand new out of box. You can still restore Time Machine backup right there.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, Tom, Bradley, this was amazing as usual. I had a blast. I hope you guys enjoyed yourself. We had a lot of really good questions, good discussions. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Dor, you did not give me a link to our next webinar.
There is one thing I do want to highlight for folks. Starting
yes,
at the end of the month, JumpCloud will be on the road again. There have been roadshows all over the place.
Yes.
We are making a big splash at the Mac Admins and Developers Conference UK in London, the last week of the month. So I was going to say March 29th and 30th, we will be in Brighton. Joel Rennick and I are each talking at Macaduck this year. We're going to be really excited to go out there. There's also a roadshow in London on the Monday, the 28th. So please sign up. We'll make sure that those links go out with the post-show survey. And we would be thrilled to meet with any of our European customers when we're over in London. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm excited to get back on the road. We've got a lot of great stuff to talk about at Macaduck this year, as well as at that roadshow. So please come on out. You can learn more at macad.uk and also on the JumpCloud site for our roadshow on the 28th.
Yep. And we're having Chicago Mac admins are having a meetup. JumpCloud's going to sponsor a meetup for Chicago Mac admins on this coming Tuesday, the 14th. And I don't have a link for that. But if you go to JumpCloud meetup, you'll find our meetup link. It'll be virtual. It's at 1:00 on Tuesday, on the 14th, whatever day of the week that is. And we'll go in person after
I think
that.
that's a Monday. Wonderful.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talked about it yesterday in the DC meetup. We had the DC meetup yesterday.
Great.
We're going to try and do an in-person meetup in April. We're going to see kind of how things are looking at. But Dor did toss the link for the next webinar into the chat there. It's going to be all about the Q2 product roadmap. So if you're interested in seeing when things are going to be out next, what's coming to JumpCloud, definitely come out and check out that webinar. It's always a good time. I think Chase Doyling is hosting that one. Chase is amazing. So one of my favorite JumpCloud.
Yep. Thank you so much for all your time. I want to thank everybody for joining us. This was really good, and we will see you next month. Take care.
See you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.